Part 3. Modern Times. Chapter 1. The 17th Century. Descartes. Cartesianism. Descartes. The 17th century, which was the greatest philosophic century of modern times and perhaps of any time, began with René Descartes. Descartes, born at La Haye in Touraine in 1596, of noble family, his real name was Descartes, was educated by the Jesuits of the College of La Flèche, followed the military profession for several years, then gave himself up to mathematics and became one of the greatest mathematicians of Europe, traveled all over Europe for his own amusement and instruction, wrote scientific and philosophical works, of which the most famous are the Discourse on Method, the Meditations, and the Rules for the Control of the Mind, resided sometimes in Paris, sometimes in Holland, and finally, at 54 years of age, unhappily attracted by the flattering invitations of Queen Christina of Sweden, proceeded to Stockholm, where he succumbed in 4 months to the severity of the climate. He died in February 1650. The system of Descartes. In the works of Descartes there are a general system of philosophy, a psychology, and a method. This order is here adopted because of the three. In Descartes, it is the third which is the most important and which has left the most profound traces. The foundation of the system of Descartes is belief in God and in the goodness of God. I say the foundation and not the starting point. The starting point is another matter, but it will be clearly seen that the foundation is what has just been stated. The starting point is this. I do not believe, provisionally, in anything, not wishing to take into account what I have been taught. I doubt everything. Is there anything I cannot doubt? It seems to me there is. I cannot doubt that I doubt. Now if I doubt, I think. If I think, I am. There is one certainty, I am. And having arrived there, Descartes is at a dead stop, for from the certitude of one's own existence, nothing can be deduced save the certitude of one's existence. For instance, shall I believe in the existence of everything that is not myself? There is no reason why I should believe in it. The world may be a dream. But if I believe in God and in a God of perfect goodness, I can then believe in something outside of myself, for God not being able to deceive himself or me, if he permits me to see the external world, it is because this external world exists. There are already, therefore, three things in which I believe. My own existence, that of God, and that of the universe. Which of these beliefs is the fundamental one? Evidently, the one not demonstrated. The axiom is that upon which one rests to demonstrate everything except itself. Now of the three things in which Descartes believed, his own existence is demonstrated by the impossibility of thinking or feeling without feeling his own existence. The other is demonstrated by the existence of a good God. The existence of a good God is demonstrated by nothing. It is believed. Hence belief in a good God is Descartes' foundation. This has not been introduced in order that he may escape from the I am at which he came to a stop. That belief certainly existed previously, and if he had recourse to it, it was because it existed first. Without that, he had too much intellectual honesty to invent it for a particular need. He had it, and he found it as it were in reserve when he asked himself if he could go beyond I am. Here was his foundation, all the rest would complete the proof. The existence of God. Although Descartes rests on God as being his first principle, he does not fail to prove his existence, and that is begging the question, something proved by what has to be proved. For if Descartes believed only in something outside himself because of a good God, that being outside himself, God, he can prove only because of the existence of a good God, who cannot deceive us, and thus is God proved by the belief in him. That is begging the question. Descartes does not fail to prove the existence of God by superabundance as it were, and this too, in itself indicates clearly that faith in God is the very foundation of the philosophy of Descartes. After having taken it as the basis of reasoning, he takes it as the goal of reasoning, which indicates that the idea of God, so to speak, encircled his mind, and that he found it at every ultimate point of thought. He proves it, therefore, first by an argument analogous to that of Saint Anselm, which is this. We, imperfect and finite, have the idea of a perfect and infinite being. We are not capable of this idea. Therefore it must have come to us from a being really perfect and infinite, and hence this perfect being exists. Another proof, that of God regarded as cause. First, I exist. Who made me? Was it myself? No, if it had been myself I should have endowed myself with all the perfections of which I can conceive, and in which I am singularly deficient. Therefore it must be some other being who created me. It was my parents. No doubt, but who created my parents and the parents of my parents? One cannot go back indefinitely from cause to cause, and there must have been a first one. Secondly, even my own actual existence, my existence at this very moment, is it the result of my existence yesterday? Nothing proves it, and there is no necessity because I existed just now that I should exist at present. There must therefore be a cause at each moment and a continuous cause. That continuous cause is God, and the whole world is a creation perpetually continued and is only comprehensible as continuous creation and is only explicable by a creator. The world. Thus sure of himself, of God, and of the world, Descartes studies the world and himself. In the world he sees souls and matter. Matter is substance and extensions, souls are substance not an extension, spiritual substance. The extended substance is endowed with impulse. Is the impulse self-generated? Are the bodies self-impelled? No, they are moved. What is the primary motive force? It is God. Souls are substances without extension and motive forces. In this respect they are analogous to God. They are united to bodies and act on them. How? This is an impenetrable mystery, but they are closely and substantially united to the bodies, which is proved by physical pains, depressing the soul and moral sufferings depressing the body, and they act on them, not by creating movements, for the quantity of movements is always the same, but by directing the movements after this fashion or that. Souls being spiritual, there is no reason for their disaggregation, that is, their demise, and in fact they do not die. It is for this reason that Descartes lays such stress on animals not having souls. If they had souls, the souls would be spiritual, they would not be susceptible to disaggregation, and would be immortal. Save atheism, there is no doctrine more dangerous and detestable than that, but animals are soulless and purely mechanism. Descartes exerts himself to prove this in great detail, and he thus escapes avowing the immortality of the souls of animals, which is repugnant to him, or by allowing that they perish with the bodies to be exposed to the objection. Will it not be the same with the souls of men? The freedom of the soul. The human soul is endowed with freedom to do good or evil. What proof is there of this freedom? First, the inward feeling that we have. Every evident idea is true. Now, not only have we the idea of this freedom, but it would be impossible for us not to have it. Freedom is known without proofs, merely by the experience we have of it. It is by the feeling of our freedom, of our free will, that we understand that we exist as a being, as a thing which is not merely a thing. The true ego is the will. Even more than an intelligent being, man is a free individual and only feels himself to be a man when feeling himself free, so that he might not believe himself to be intelligent, nor think himself sensible, etc. But not to think himself free would for him be moral suicide, and in fact he actually never does anything which he does not believe himself to be free to do, that is, which he does not believe that he might avoid doing, if he so wished. Those who say it is simply the feeling that it is better for ourselves which tends to make us do this instead of doing that are deeply in error. They forget that we often prefer the worst for ourselves in order to prove to ourselves that we are free and therefore have no other motive power than our own freedom. And this is exactly what contemporaneous philosophy has thus formulated. Will is neither determinate nor indeterminate, it is determinative. Even when a very obvious reason leads us to a thing, although morally speaking it is difficult for us to do the opposite, nevertheless, speaking absolutely, we can, for we are always free to prevent ourselves from pursuing a good thing clearly known, provided only that we think it is beneficial, thereby to give evidence of the truth of our free will. It is the pure and simple wish to be free which creates an action, it is the all-powerful liberty. As has been happily observed, in relation to the universe the philosophy of Descartes is a mechanical philosophy, in relation to man the philosophy of Descartes is a philosophy of will. As has also been remarked, there are very striking analogies between Corneille and Descartes from the point of view of the apotheosis of the will and the Meditations having appeared after the great works of Corneille. It is not so much that Corneille was a Cartesian as that Descartes was a follower of Corneille. Psychology of Descartes. Descartes has almost written a psychology, what with his treatise on the passions and his letters and, besides, certain passages in his Meditations. The soul thinks and has passions. There are three kinds of ideas, the factitious, the adventitious, and the innate. The factitious ideas are those which the imagination forms, the adventitious ideas are those suggested by the external world through the intermediary of the senses, the innate ideas are those constituting the mind itself, the conditions under which it thinks, and apart from which it cannot think. We cannot conceive an object not extended, nor an object apart from time, nor anything without a cause. The ideas of time, space, and cause are innate ideas. We cannot conceive ourselves as other than free. The idea of liberty is an innate idea. The soul has passions, it is therein that, without dependence on the body, it has intimate relations with and is modified by it, not radically, but in its daily life. There are operations of the soul which cannot strictly be termed passions, and yet which are directed or at least influenced by the body. Memory is passive, and consequently memory is a species of passion. The lively sensations which the body transmits to the brain leave impressions, Malebranche would say traces, and according to these impressions the soul is moved a second or a third time, and that is what is called memory. The impressions of the brain render it suitable to stir the soul in the same way as it has been stirred before, and also to make it recollect something, just as the folds in a piece of paper or linen make it more suitable to be folded anew as it was before than if it had never been thus folded. Similarly, the association of ideas is passive, and in consequence is a kind of passion. The association of ideas is the fact that thought passes along the same path it has already traversed and follows in its labyrinth the thread which interlinks its thoughts, and this thread is the traces which thoughts have left in the brain. In abandoning ourselves to the association of ideas, we are passive and we yield ourselves freely to a passion. That is so true that current speech itself recognizes this. Musing is a passion. It is possible to have a passion for musing, and musing is nothing else than the association of ideas in which the will does not intervene. The passions. Coming to the passions strictly speaking, there are some which are of the soul and only of the soul. The passion for God is a passion of the soul, the passion for liberty is a passion of the soul, but there are many more which are the effects of the union of the soul with the body. These passions are excited in the soul by a state of the body or a movement of the body or of some part of the body. They are emotions of the soul corresponding to movements of the machine. All passions have relation to the desire for pleasure and the fear of pain, and according as they relate to the former or the latter are they expansive or oppressive. There are 6 principal passions, of which all the rest are only modifications. Admiration, love, desire, joy, having relation to the appetite of happiness, hatred, sadness, having relation to the fear of pain. All the passions are good and may become bad. Descartes in this deviates emphatically from Stoicism, for which the passions are simply maladies of the soul. All passions are good in themselves. They are destined, this is a remarkable theory, to cause the duration of thoughts which would otherwise pass and be rapidly effaced. By reason of this, they cause man to act. If he were only directed by his thoughts, unaccompanied by his passions, he would never act, and if it be recognized that man is born for action, it will at the same time be recognized that it is necessary he should have passions. But, you will say, there can be good passions, of a nature to give force to just ideas, and evil passions. No, they are all good, but all also have their bad side, their deviation, rather, which enables them to become bad. Therefore, in each passion no matter what it be, it is always possible to distinguish between the passion itself, which is always good, and the excess, the deviation, the degradation or corruption of this passion which constitutes, if it be desired to call it so, an evil passion, and this is what Descartes demonstrates, passion by passion, in the fullest detail, in his treatise on the passions. The part of the soul. If it is thus, what will be the part of the soul? The soul is the will? It will be to abandon itself to good passions, or more accurately to the good that is in all passions, and to reduce the passions to be nothing more than themselves. In courage, for example, there is courage and temerity. The action of the will, enlightened by the judgment, will consist in reducing courage to be nothing but courage. In fear, there is cowardice, and there is the feeling of self-preservation which, according to Descartes, is the foundation of fear, and which is a very good passion. The action of the soul is to reduce fear to simple prudence. But how will the will effect these metamorphoses or at least these departures, these separations, these reductions to the due proportion? Directly it can effect nothing upon the passions, it cannot remove them, it cannot even remove the baser portions of them, but it can exercise influence over them by the intermediary of reasoning. It can lead them to the attentive consideration of the thought that they carry with them, and by this consideration modify them. For instance, if it is a question of fear, the soul forces fear to consider that the peril is much less than was imagined, and thus little by little brings it back to simple prudence. Note that this method, although indirect, is very potent, for it ends by really transforming the passions into their opposites. Persuade fear that there is less peril in marching forward than in flight, and that the most salutary flight is the flight forward, and you have changed fear to courage. But such an influence of the will over the passions is extraordinarily unlikely. It will never take place. Yes, by habit. Habit too is a passion, or, if you will, a passive state, like that of memory or the association of ideas, and there are men possessed only of that passion. But the will, by the means which have been described, by imposing an act, a first act, creates a commencement of habit, by imposing a second confirms that habit, by imposing a third strengthens it, and so on. In plain words, the will, by reasoning with the passions and reasoning with them incessantly, brings them back to what is good in them, and ends by bringing them back there permanently, so that it arrives at having only the passions it desires, or, if you prefer it, for it is the same thing, at having only the passion for good. Morality consists in loving noble passions, as was later observed by Vauvenergues, and that means to love all the passions, each for what is good in it, that is to reduce each passion to what real goodness is inherent in it, and that is to gather all the passions into one, which is the passion of duty. The method of Descartes. As has been observed, not only had Descartes influence through all that he wrote, but it was by his method that he has exerted the greatest and most durable sway, and that is why we conclude with the examination of his method. It is all contained in this. To accept nothing as true except what is evident, to accept as true all that is evident. Descartes therefore made evidence the touchstone of certainty. But mark well the profound meaning of this method. What is it that gives me the assurance of the evidence of such or such an idea? How shall I know that such an idea is really evident to me? Because I see it in perfect clearness? No, that does not suffice. The evidence may be deceptive, there can be false evidence, all the wrong ideas of the philosophers of antiquity, save when they were sophists, had for them the character of being evident. Why? Why should error be presented to the mind as an evident truth? Because in truth, in profound truthfulness, it must be admitted that judgment does not depend upon the intelligence. And on what does it depend? On will, on free will. This is how. No doubt, error depends on our judgment, but our judgment depends on our will in the sense that it depends on us whether we adhere to our judgment without it being sufficiently precise or do not adhere to it because it is not sufficiently precise. If I abstain from giving my judgment on a subject when I do not conceive it with sufficient clearness and distinction, it is evident that I shall not be deceived. Evidence is therefore not only a matter of judgment, of understanding, of intelligence, it is a matter of energetic will and of freedom courageously acquired. We are confronted with evidence when, with a clear brain, we are capable, in order to accept or refuse what it lays before us, of acting after such a fashion, of having put ourselves in such a state of the soul that we feel that no external force can constrain us to think in such or such a way. These external forces are authority, prejudices, personal interest, or that of party. The faculty of perceiving evidence is therefore the triumph both of sound judgment in itself and of a freedom of mind which, supposing probity, scrupulousness, and courage, and perhaps the most difficult of all courage, supposes a profound and vigorous morality. Evidence is given only to men who are first highly intelligent and next, or rather before all else, are profoundly honest. Evidence is not a consequence of morality, but morality is the condition of evidence. There is the foundation of the method of Descartes, add to it his advice on the art of reasoning, which even in his time was not at all novel, but which with him is very precise, not to generalize too hastily, not to be put off with words, but to have a clear definition of every word, etc., and thus a sufficient idea of it will be obtained. Now first, to this method Descartes was unfaithful, as always happens, and often accepted the suggestions of his magnificent imagination as the evidences of his reason. Secondly, the touchstone of evidence is certainly the best, but is far from being infallible, and Vico has ridiculed it with as much sense as wit, and the freest mind can still find false things evident. Yet, thirdly, favoring freedom of research, self-controlled, individual and scornful of all authority, the method of Descartes has become a banner, a motto, and a flag for all modern philosophy. Descartes, the father of modern philosophy. And from all that the result has been that all modern philosophy, with few exceptions, has recognized Descartes as its parent, that individual evidence, if it may be thus expressed, favoring temerity and each believing himself closer to the truth the more he differed from others and consequently was unable to suspect himself of being subject to influences. Individual evidence has provided a fresh opportunity for self-deception. Finally, that Descartes, by a not uncommon metamorphosis, by means of his system which he did not follow, has become the head or the venerated ancestor of doctrines which he would have detested and which he already did detest more than all others. Because he said that evidence alone and the free investigation of evidence led to truth, he has become the ancestor of the skeptics who are persuaded that surrender must be made only to evidence and that evidence cannot be found. And he has become the ancestor of the positivists who believe that evidence certainly exists somewhere, but not in metaphysics or in theodicy, or in knowledge of the soul, of immortality, and of God, branches of knowledge which surpass our means of knowing, which are in fact outside knowledge. So that this man who conceived more than any man, this man who so often constructed without a sure foundation, and this man, yet again, as has been aptly said, who always thought by innate ideas, by his formula, has become the master and above all the guarantor of those who are the most reserved and most distrustful as to philosophic construction, innate ideas, and imagination. This does not in the least diminish his brilliant merit, it is only one of those changes of direction in which the history of ideas abounds.